Hey, thank you for joining us this evening. So welcome to those of you who have joined us online on the Zoom webinar, and to all of you who are in the room from the university and from community groups and local residents. So thank you all for being here. My name is Schumacher Cohen, and this is a special presentation on Israel-Palestine, recent developments and difficulties ahead. I serve the University of Scranton as Assistant Vice President for Community Engagement and Government Affairs. I've taught as an adjunct in political science, and I coordinate the university's political dialogue series. Prior to coming to Scranton, I served as the Deputy Director of Churches for Middle East Peace for more than 5 years, the DC-based coalition of more than 30 church bodies dedicated to U.S. policies in support of a just and lasting Israeli-Palestinian peace. I'm now a member of their Catholic Advisory Council, which is our national partner in convening tonight's lecture. We are very glad to have with us, via Zoom, in just a moment, Dr. Bernard Sabella, a Palestinian Catholic sociologist, who is joining us from Jerusalem, and I will formally introduce him in just a few moments. Let me say a few words about how tonight's event first came about. The lecture has actually been planned for several months. It was before the October 7th Hamas attack and the ensuing war in Gaza. Bernard was scheduled to come to Scranton as part of a national lecture series at Catholic universities, including the University of Notre Dame, in honor of the late Father Drew Christiansen of the Society of Jesus. And Bernard was going to speak on broader regional issues. Due to the events on the ground, we have transitioned to Zoom. Grateful that Bernard can still join us. We will note that it's past midnight in Jerusalem, so we're especially grateful. And he will be speaking instead on the current conflict in Israel-Palestine. I think that Father Drew would be very glad that we are still gathering here. For those of you who are not familiar with his career, he was a distinguished Georgetown professor, served in various capacities with the Holy See. For the U.S. bishops, he was the editor-in-chief of the Jesuit American magazine, and committed throughout his career to the Palestinian Christian community, to interreligious dialogue, and to peace in the homeland. So a couple of notes about how this evening will flow. We're going to first hear from Dr. Sabella with a talk that he pre-recorded in case of any technical difficulties. Then he's going to join us for live Q&A, and that portion of the program, I'm going to invite Dr. Michael Azar to join me up here, and we're going to have a conversation among us, take your questions, hopefully live. You'll be able to come up to the microphone. You can also use an index card if you prefer, and we'll also try to take the questions from those who are on the webinar. I want to say a word also about Michael Azar. At this point, he is an associate professor in theology and religious studies. He leads the Scranton Study Abroad class, Christianity in the Middle East, that usually goes to the Holy Land in January. He specializes in ancient and contemporary Eastern Christian-Jewish relations, and is a special advisor to the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew on Christian-Jewish dialogue. So, by way of introduction, I want to speak partly on a personal note. I have known Dr. Sabella for more than 20 years, from when I studied abroad in Jerusalem as an undergraduate college student. Raised Christian and as the daughter of an Israeli Jew, and so with much extended family in Israel, I took Bernard's class that fall on Palestinian society and politics. I gained a new and deeper understanding of Palestinian history, perspectives, and daily realities in the West Bank especially. That semester led me to my work with Churches for Middle East Peace and continuing their current PhD research, and is a reminder of just how much impact a good, caring, compassionate teacher can have on a student, and the importance of learning and interaction across different identities and experiences. I'm seeing more people, their seats over here. If you're not afraid of the front row, you can come on in. On the day of October 7th, as the terrible news was erupting from southern Israel of Hamas's brutal attack and the taking of hostages, I reached out immediately in two ways. I called my mother, and I checked on our Israeli family in Tel Aviv, who were safe, but of course very much shocked, traumatized, and afraid. And as it became clear that weekend that Israel's retaliation was already hitting civilian infrastructure and would enact a disproportionate response on Gaza's blockaded civilian population, now over 11,000 killed, I reached out to Bernard among Palestinian colleagues and friends. In the weeks that have ensued, we have seen a lot of dehumanization. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian sentiment are on the rise, and an inability to hold the suffering and trauma of Palestinians and Israelis at the same time in our minds and in our hearts. We have also seen analyses that fail to look at the arc of the long-standing conflict and the ongoing occupation, I believe we have a choice to make in how we stand in this moment, an ethic of our engagement that, guided by Catholic social teaching, calls us to, one, uphold the human dignity of each person, Palestinians and Israelis, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Patriarch Sabella, has talked about the importance of, quote, closeness in these horrific times. And two, to analyze a problem through the lens of systems and structural injustice, the impact on vulnerable and marginalized populations, so that we can address root causes and seek solutions that are grounded in security and freedom and equality for all the people of the Holy Land. And so it's a blessing to have with us tonight Dr. Sabella to help us navigate these difficult days and these very difficult questions. So let me say a word about his biography. Again, he's joining us tonight from East Jerusalem. He is a retired associate professor from Bethlehem University, an institution of higher learning in the Lasallian tradition, located in the West Bank. In 2006, Dr. Sabella was elected to the Palestinian Legislative Council from 2011, and from 2011 to 2015, he was chairperson of the Palestinian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Born in Jerusalem in 1945, his family became refugees from West Jerusalem during the 1948 war. Dr. Sabella would later come to the United States for higher education. He earned his bachelor's degree here in Pennsylvania at Franklin Marshall University. Then he earned his master's degree and his PhD in sociology from the University of Virginia. Dr. Sabella is also executive director of the Department of Service to Palestinian Refugees at the Middle East Council of Churches. He's author of A Life Worth Living, The Story of a Palestinian Catholic, which I recommend. I'm plugging your book, Bernard, as well as many journal articles on topics related to Palestinian society and politics. He is a longtime academic. He is a leader in civic, church, interfaith, and humanitarian affairs, and in the work of justice and peace. I do want to give a special thanks to the university offices that helped co-sponsor tonight's event: Community Relations, Political Science, Theology and Religious Studies, the Ella Korea Initiative, Peace and Justice Studies, and a Diversity Initiatives grant that gave us our fancy food over here. And thanks again also to Churches for Middle East Peace. There is information about them. You can find them online on cmep.org if you want to engage in that way through a faith-based Christian organization. Of course, there's many organizations that are advocating for peace, and you can connect in different ways. And also the Bethlehem University Foundation, because they are a sponsor of the National Lecture Series. So now we're going to do our technology thing and see if we can get this to work here.
Good day. It's really a privilege to be invited on Zoom to address the Scranton Divinity School through the good offices of Julie. Initially, this intervention was supposed to be in person, part of honoring the late Father Drew Christiansen. But then the war and the events overtook us, and we are doing it via Zoom. A lot of efforts went into this, particularly from CMEP staff, people who worked diligently with me, with Julie, and with some of Notre Dame staffers, Kroc School or Kroc Institute. I hope I'm saying it right, who did a lot of things in order to prepare for the in-person intervention, and now we have to do it via Zoom. So thank you all. The situation on the ground is horrendous, to say the least. Both Palestinians and Israelis have suffered tremendously, both psychological, physical, and I would say infrastructure and ecological, since October 7th. It's not time to say who is to blame, who is not to blame. But the results of the war speak of over 1,600 Israelis who were killed, taken hostages, and hundreds of others injured or displaced. On the Palestinian side, you are talking about over 10,000, mostly children and women killed, and over 20,000 who have been injured, and a couple of thousand who are still under the rubble. And stories, really dramatic and tragic stories, keep coming back, recurring, of parents looking for their children under the rubble, or of families looking for their members, beloved members, under the rubble. There is an almost complete destruction of the habitat of Gaza, and there is really a human, social, psychological, and ecological disaster. And these effects, especially the psychological effects of trauma, will accompany both groups for years to come. This situation is unthinkable. The scenario is one of an inferno in which the innocents became scapegoats for a violent confrontation that has apparently no possibility of exit. I have friends in Gaza, and I have come to know these friends through my work with the Middle East Council of Churches, Department of Service to Palestinian Refugees. And they have been working there, some of them, since the 50s, when the Palestine refugee problem was created. Now, in Gaza, you have 1,000 Christians. And from what I gathered talking to some of them when I could during the last few days, what is left apparently today of the Christian population is no more than 800, and they are all, mostly all, lodged in the Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox churches. Around 20% of Gaza Christian population, and this is a very, very rough estimate, succeeded in exiting Gaza from the Rafah cross point. And let me say that we are in pain. We are grieving, and we are mourning in the Holy Land. On the Palestinian side, I feel mounting disappointment with the response of the world community to the affliction caused by war on the Palestinian civilian population. In particular, Palestinians are disappointed with the US position, despite of all what has been done, and with the European position, particularly as Palestinians witness around the clock scenes of horrendous and horrible killing of hundreds and hundreds of civilians, the wiping of whole neighborhoods, and the disregard for international humanitarian law. I'm not a military man, nor do I espouse violence or war, regardless of justification. As a Palestinian academic, this war comes in the context of the wider and historic conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, Arabs and Jews, if you wish, and it raises difficult and painful questions. First, is it possible really for Palestinians and Israelis to make peace only by themselves? I have heard over the years so many wise Western politicians who are seeking election or re-election, who were arguing that we can't do anything for peace in Israel and Palestine. It's an insurmountable problem, and let's not waste our time. And then, on the other hand, some of these politicians would say, it's up to Israelis and Palestinians to make peace. And when Palestinians and Israelis are left alone, then you have issues and questions of imbalance of power, of Israel from a Palestinian perspective doing what it wants with no willingness to take responsibility for any of its actions. And then you have the Oslo Accord, and people point to the Oslo Accord, and nowadays people say, really, the Oslo Accords were born dead. And yet out of Oslo came a kind of accommodation, I wouldn't say peace, but accommodation between the PLO on the one side, which was once described as a terrorist organization, and the state of Israel. Yet, what happened on the ground after Oslo pointed to the fact that the Palestinian Authority, which to some of you who may not know, is the Palestinian government, in effect, in the West Bank, has been weakened again and again by Israeli policies, especially the settlements in the occupied West Bank, but also by a kind of a weakening of this government, of this Palestinian government or Palestinian Authority, by the fact that Israel dragged its legs on really achieving any kind of peaceful resolution, serious peaceful talk with the Palestinian Authority. So the Palestinian Authority was put aside. It was propped up by the US, Europe, Israel itself for security purposes in order to coordinate that with Israel. But it was not given any, I would say, strong incentive in front of its people to be considered strong enough to manage the conflict with Israel, to manage in the sense to resolve the conflict with Israel, and to achieve certain political gains through a negotiated process. Some Israeli politicians did not help either, and they on purpose, they followed a policy of further weakening the Palestinian Authority by strengthening or by accommodating themselves and their policies to the presence of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And the purpose was not to support Hamas, certainly not, but to have this division between Gaza, Hamas, and Ramallah, Palestinian Authority. And it did work. This policy did work for some time, but the sad thing about it is that this division was used not only by Israeli politicians, but also by European and American politicians to argue who speaks for the Palestinians. The Palestinians are divided, and therefore nobody can speak for them. Not the Palestinian Authority, not anyone else. Certainly, there were divisions within Palestinian society and politics, and I'm not discounting it, but I think the lack of political wisdom and political, I would say, stamina on the part of Israeli and some Western politicians, if you wish, have not contributed to dispel this division or to dispel this weakness that Palestinians have come to see the Palestinian Authority. Now, on October 7th, when the Hamas attack took place, the US, Europe, and in fact, many other countries came to the support of Israel. It was clear that Israel was in a crisis. And it was clear also that the US was set to play a crucial role in consolidating or supporting Israel as it planned its war on Gaza. And this position has been kind of a painful position for the Palestinians, because the expectation was that yes, you, the United States, you are doing what you are supposed to do, but at the same time, you yourself and European politicians have been so lukewarm about advancing the peace process that now, all of a sudden, with this tragic moment, terrible moment, you are in support of the one side at the expense not of the Palestinians, but in my view, at the expense of a peaceful resolution that should have come years ago. Unfortunately, it didn't. So yes, there is a human tragedy nowadays. There is a psychological wound that is so traumatic that it is so difficult to overcome. And yet, my question is, what role to the US and to Europe, but particularly to the US? In the past, Israel has adopted a policy of managing the conflict. You manage the conflict and everything will be fine. You build the electronic surveillance infrastructure and everything will be fine. you build a separation or security, call it whatever you want, fence, wall, separation wall, and you get everything fine. You do everything you want to control the population, and everything will go. This has not worked out. The tragedy of October 7th has shown that this has not worked out. Managing the conflict and not pursuing an active political decision-making for peace, even by the US and Europe, have meant that Israelis and Palestinians are set to suffer, they are set to make more wars, and they are set to really a situation of mistrust and the impossibility in the minds of some of having a reconciliation, middle ground, and some kind of living side by side. Now, what do I think? I think there is a need for a genuine peace process. Without a genuine peace process, we are going to be left alone here. And left alone, I mean Israelis and Palestinians, Palestinians and Israelis. And we are going to witness also cycles, recurring cycles of war, destruction, and all of us will pay a heavy cost. All of us. No one will be safe. So, what should we do the day after? I think there should be a quick resumption of a peace process. And the quick resumption of the peace process should be done in order to implement quickly decisions that have been agreed upon by the two sides. We cannot discount any of the two sides. And by the two sides, I mean Israel on the one side and the Palestinian Authority on the other. And this is important because without having the acceptance and agreement of the two sides, then you are going to impose. And imposing will not be accepted by anyone. The imposition of a government, temporary government, is a no-starter. You have to have an agreement to which Palestinians and Israelis subscribe to. Now, some say, but you know, the day after you are going to see Gaza totally desolated, destroyed, and so on. So when you talk about political scenarios for the day after, governing scenarios for the day after, you have over 70% of the Gaza population today displaced. They are either in the south or they are internally displaced within the small territory of northern Gaza. So what do? You come and have a government, a imposed government on them, or let's say military rule or military government? No. I think the day after, and this is my simple, maybe my simple suggestion, and I have spoken about it a couple of times. Gaza and Palestine, and I think also Israel is in need of a serious Marshall-like plan to come out of the rubble. So you have to work a political solution. At the same time, you have to work out a developed Marshall-like plan for the reconstruction of Gaza and for the rehabilitation of all kinds of physical, psychological, economic damage that have occurred throughout this very, very terrible conflict and war. So we cannot just simply say we can continue the way we were before October 7th. Certainly not. And yet, if the same policies continue within Israel with respect to the Palestinians, example, West Bank settlement, example, the violence that we have seen lately by Israeli settlers in the West Bank, then this is not going to work out. It's not absolutely not going to work out. Certainly, I'm not talking about international intervention as such, but there is a need for people here in this Holy Land to hear what powerful states like the US would have to say when it comes to a different future for both Israelis and Palestinians. Allow me to end by saying that the environment today is one of uncertainty. Some of us already question the wisdom of some Israeli politicians who worked for the division of Gaza, Hamas, from Fatah, Ramallah in the West Bank to increase the intra-Palestinian division. Others question the failure of the Israeli establishment in preventing or preempting October 7th. Some also question the decision of Hamas military wing to wage the stupendous attack on October 7th. Others remain in a state of shock and trauma, feeling down and unwilling to grasp what is happening around them and in Gaza and its surroundings in specific. The times are difficult and the times are not normal. Even though the Holy Land is known for the miracles that happened within its bounds in the past, it seems that nowadays the miracle of peace is far-fetched, as well as the other smaller miracles we would expect to happen in a land torn by conflict and war. Let us pray and hope for peace and harmonious living in the future. even though this hope now appears so far distant. Because whether we like it or not, there is no other way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard, for your presentation. In a moment, I'd like to start by turning it to you to ask, since this was recorded a couple days ago, if you have anything to add. But in the meantime, I'll remind everybody, if you'd like to come up to the microphone to ask a question, you are welcome to, and start coming up as you wish. Otherwise, we have note cards over there that I don't know if anybody picked up, so maybe I'll ask Thomas. If you didn't get a note card, Thomas will very graciously agree to,
Janice.
Janice has them, all right, pass it out. So Thomas gets to take a break for 1 second. And we'll collect them if you'd like to ask your question more anonymously, either to Dr. Sabella or Julie or me perhaps. So first, I would like to start by just simply asking Bernard, is there anything in watching yourself again from 2 days ago, or a couple days ago, is there anything you would like to add, either to your remarks or in regard to the situation specifically, if anything major has changed in the last couple days?
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate you, appreciate Julie, appreciate the audience. And I think we are living in very difficult and hard times. But when you look at the statistics, and we Palestinians keep emphasizing that each one of the 11,000 people so far killed is a life, a human life. And what hurts most is that 70%, really, over 70,000, over 7,000 of those killed are really children and women. And today, at Shifa Hospital, which is encircled by the Israeli army, we have witnessed death of babies. We have witnessed death of ill people, sick people, and this should not have happened. Now, to the argument made by some in Israel that the hospital is used as a Hamas command, many people, influential and non-influential, have asked for a thorough investigation of that claim, even though doctors, and I heard the director of Shifa Hospital this afternoon, who emphatically denied that Hamas was in the hospital. Now, remember, when you talk about the Gaza Strip, you are not talking about vast territory. So you should imagine the intensity of the bombardments. Somebody mentioned like 2 small nuclear weapons on a 2.4 million population inhabiting 140 square miles. 140 square miles. And so the situation really is heart-wrenching. And it is not something that Palestinians can absorb. And yes, we say we are strong, we stand, and so on. But the idea of having civilians, children, elderly, sick, killed does not justify anything. People here ask, where is international humanitarian law? Now, one other thing personally I need to say, that I'm here speaking on my own, and I do not represent any political party, no government, or any other organization. I will stop here and give you the opportunity to ask questions. Not only for me, but also for the other panelists as well.
Would anyone like to come up and ask a question? I will start with one. Oh, okay, all right, we'll have one more after. So most of our focus has been, obviously, given the last month on Gaza. I'm wondering if you can comment both on the situation or sentiments or opinions maybe of first maybe Israeli Jews and their views or their views in regard to the war, especially since many would be related to current hostages. And then also on the general feeling in East Jerusalem, where you live, or elsewhere in the state of Israel or in the West Bank, how, simply how is everybody getting along?
Well, when you are in a situation of conflict, and you are really grieving, mourning, at the same time, a process of adaptation seeps in. And I'm sorry to say adaptation. As I said in my presentation, I have been trying to call and communicate with my friends who are in the two churches in Gaza. And some of them are medical doctors, one heart surgeon, one director of a hospital, and so on. And when I speak to them, they say we are managing. And then I hear stories how they are, sharing food, how they are sharing water, how they are sharing even the sleeping environment, like 2, 3, 4 families living together in one classroom at the Roman Catholic school, which is next to the church. Now, with the trauma, allow me to say this, and I think this is a point that we should keep in mind. With the trauma going on, I am afraid that both of the peoples who inhabit this land have in a way been swept by the tragedy. And what is happening is we have become in a way numb. We were numbness to what is happening on the other side. For example, it breaks my heart when I hear from the other side people who say, just finish them off. Finish them off. And how do you explain that? How do you explain that? You cannot see that Palestinians are also humans. And yes, as someone told me the other day, on October 7th, many Palestinians did not question what happened. They questioned what happened. And they said, one friend of mine on the main street of Jerusalem, commercial street, told me, did Hamas really think in the aftermath of the attack. A woman I know told me the first hours of the attack were horrible, a Palestinian woman. And she said, we fully identified with the victims. I was, touched by that. And then she continued saying, but then when I saw what and heard and saw what the Israelis are doing in the Gaza Strip in terms of bombardment, in terms of neighborhood annihilation, really all neighborhood. She said, I became numb. I don't know how to reflect anymore. I don't know how to identify anymore. And I'm in a trauma. So this is it. You try to manage. And we always say here in Jerusalem, we are much better off than the people in Gaza. We are much better off than the people surrounding Gaza. Yes, there are displaced people here and there, but remember, there are over 1.7 million displaced Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And they are most of them have gone to the south. And that is a human tragedy. Today, I was speaking with a doctor friend of mine from Gaza who succeeded to get out of the Gaza Strip because he carries a foreign nationality, a foreign passport. And I was telling him, I do hope that you will be back in Gaza soon. And I was shocked by what he told me. He said, I don't think so. I think we Palestinians are living another Nakba. And when you have people like medical doctors, like directors of relief organizations who opt to leave because they don't see a way out, because they cannot do anything, exactly like doctors in the hospital who say, we don't have the means to treat children. We don't have the means to treat sick people. And they are not playing a game. They are telling it as it is. It's not for you, not for propaganda, not for TV, not for politicians. It's their life. It's the lives of their patients. And there they are saying and stressing that we have a disaster. And so while they are having a disaster, they go on. As I said before, we are thankful that in Jerusalem so far and in other parts in the country, but the situation in the West Bank is getting worse and worse. There are confrontations. Some people, experts, I'm no expert, predict that maybe the confrontations in the West Bank will widen. Others say no, they will not widen. So we hope and pray for better days and better times.
Thank you. We do have one question. But I'll just say as clarification for those that are less familiar, Dr. Sabella used the word Nakba. If you're not familiar, it's the Arabic word meaning catastrophe, roughly, often used to describe the situation of 1948 when a lot of Palestinians were forced out of their homes, only to never return in many cases. And Gaza, I believe, Julie can correct me if I'm wrong, is 70% 1948 refugees or descendants already.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to your question of, because I have a lot of colleagues in the Israeli human rights community, and one of them is named Tanya Hari, and she runs an organization called Isha, which is an Israeli human rights group that has worked to help the freedom of movement in Gaza for many, many years. And just to your question, Michael, about how Israeli Jews are experiencing this moment, she said that, you know, when she sees the pictures of the hostages around Israel, she feels like any of them could have been her. And so I think, you know, that there's an invisibility of these people who are obviously held captive in Gaza that weighs very heavily on Israeli Jews. It's a very, you know, we heard from Bernard, these are very small territories. Gaza is a very small place with a very dense population. The West Bank is small. Israel proper is small. Everybody is affected. Whether you're Israeli, whether you're Palestinian, you know somebody who's affected. You're not, there's no way for you to be unaffected. And as Bernard said, in terms of, and we talked about this at another gathering a couple weeks ago, that this moment has brought these existential kinds of traumas back. So the Nakba, which is, as we heard, the dispossession for Palestinians and dislocation when Israel was created, but also for Israelis, this existential fear. And some of the people who are held hostage and some of the people of the Palestinians who were displaced are in their 80s and 90s who actually lived through whether Holocaust experiences or experiences of their parents, or actually were 1948 refugees. So it's bringing up so much trauma, and I think as Bernard had said, it's a concern of how people can deal with that trauma when hopefully we are on the day after.
We have a question.
Marwan Wafa, I'm a Palestinian American, and I am the son of refugees from 1948. And I do value never again slogan that the Jews come up with, and I highly appreciate the Jewish Voices for Peace. Never again for all. It's not only for Jews, for all human beings. Netanyahu was recorded after the Oslo, priding himself that he is sabotaging the peace process and he will not make it work. Documented. So the intent to establish two states is actually not a reality in the minds of the extremist Israeli leadership. So the question is, how can you really accommodate both Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace with dignity to the Palestinians because they don't have it? By the way, Israeli government has been treating them for 75 years, not 20, not 30, 75 years. So yes, what Hamas did is terrible, but they are the occupied and Israel is the occupier. An occupier does not have the right to defend itself because they are the occupier and they're not equal. So the question that is to be posed to the world community, when you have an infection, you don't put a Band-Aid on it when you go to the hospital. You deal with the root causes, and the root cause is occupation. So unless we acknowledge the Israelis, the Israeli leadership acknowledges that there is an occupation, which I don't think they do, then how can you convince both sides to sit together with pure intentions to save the lives of innocent Palestinians and Jews? And this notion of anti-Semitic is baloney because Palestinians are Semitic. So we cannot be anti-Semitic. I think we should be clear on anti-justice when it comes to what is going on. So I don't know what the answer is, Dr. Sabella. How can you bring, which in my mind cannot happen with Netanyahu and his regime. And unfortunately, there are many level-headed, genuinely interested Jews. A lot of them are in the US, and I know some of them are in Israel-Palestine. And I can also add that the Palestinian Authority is corrupt, which needs to be also replaced. So the problem, we have two corrupt regimes, the Palestinians and the Israelis. How can we fix that? And I don't know the answer to that. Thank you.
We get all.
Wow. Okay. Should I answer?
If he has a great answer, yes.
As much as you can, or want to, yes.
Should I answer?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yes.
But I, yes, in principle, I agree with you. I have no disagreement with you on that. But if you look at the history of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, you would see that there are two narratives. And we, the peoples in this land, occupied and occupier, have not been able to really come to terms with the narrative of the other side. We have not. Palestinians, a Hebrew University professor once told me, even if there is peace, there is still the narrative, the opposing narratives. What do we do with that? What do we do with that? And in the negotiation process, and I'm no expert in negotiations, but in the negotiation process, people spoke about macro political positions or gains. And some wise negotiators were talking, okay, let's do some micro political gains and to see how we can advance further. Now, with this tragedy of this war and what is happening to both peoples in this land, it's not simply that we need to see the hurt on the other side. It's also, in my view, the US, and I repeat this, the US has not shown leadership in sustaining a genuine and workable peace process. And this is painful. This is painful because the US has the power, even now, with all the problems you are having within your own society and politics, you do have the power to make a difference. And if you don't, after this disaster in Gaza, if you don't move, if the US does not move to emphatically work out a political solution between the two parties, and I insist between the two parties, we cannot wish the Israelis away, and the Israelis cannot wish us away. It's not a matter of wishing that the other side is not here. We are stuck. I often remember the wise words of the late Meron Benvenisti, who was vice mayor of Jerusalem for some time in the 80s. And he said, what is being created under occupation, and he called it occupation, and many Israelis call it occupation, is that we are creating a symbiotic relationship. For those of you who are in biology know that two plants get to be stuck with each other. They feed on each other, usually in a good, positive way. But here in Palestine and Israel, this symbiotic relationship has been, not so kind and not so, there were some good spots here and there, like more and more Arab doctors working in Israeli hospitals, like people accommodating each other, accepting each other, despite political, despite psychological, and despite other social differences, and I would say even discrimination. Yes, discrimination. And yet, with this process, the symbiotic relationship, we have become stuck. And stuck negatively in a political sense, despite some progress here or there. Now the question, Gaza, how do we get unstuck? Do we wipe out the other people? And it's not acceptable. So you wipe out the other people. So what? What next? Do you introduce peace in this way? Would you live with yourselves this way? And I'm asking this question to both sides. And people can criticize thinking like my thinking on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. But what have we learned from a century of conflict? And if I want to accommodate to the Israelis, I need them also to accept that they are an occupying force and that there is a need to end with occupation and to give Palestinians, and so that Palestinians can really exercise their legitimate right to their own political future. I stop here.
If you have a note card or need a note card, please make sure to like raise your hand or something and somebody will pick it up. Otherwise,
I just want to add to what Bernard said on this one question about the, are you not hearing? Can you hear you better if I do this? Okay. Just to step back for a minute in terms of the U.S. policy points that Bernard was making, is that before October 7th and really for the last 5-6 years, the U.S. administration, both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, were pursuing a policy with making peace between Israel and the Arab countries and not between Israel and the Palestinians. And I think that was a huge mistake. It was an ignoring of the Palestinian problem. I was in Israel and Palestine in March in the West Bank and in Tel Aviv, and it was I used the word combustible. It felt extremely tense. So unfortunately, it was not a surprise to me. I mean, it was a surprise because of how horrible the October 7th attack was, but the fact that it was a boiling place, many people knew that. And it is very sad that it's taken this attack to put this issue back on the sort of front pages and on people's priority list. For those of us who have been paying attention to it for many, many years or living it, that's very painful. And I'll also say that my experience is always traveling to Israel and Palestine is that there is a difference in terms of the lived realities. Whenever I spend time in the West Bank, the difference in the freedom of movement, the ability to go places, the ability to live your life normally is completely different than it is when I visit my family in Tel Aviv, which feels much more like being in the United States, where you can go and you can do things freely. Of course, that was not the experience of the Israelis on October 7th, but again, things can go back to somewhat calm, somewhat normal for Israelis, but the Palestinians living under occupation, living in a blockade in Gaza, that is not a normal situation, and it has been festering for a very long time. So if there's any silver lining in this, it will be that it puts things back on the map for politics.
Dr. Krause?
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sabella, for ironically, I think, an optimistic talk in this time. The fact that you can actually envision the possibility of peace beyond the current moment is really something. And I think giving a sense to people who haven't been discussing this conflict for as long as some of us have, it's shocking to think that does pass for optimism. So thank you for that. I actually originally risen, I speak as perhaps the only Jew in the room. I'm not certain if that's the case. And ironically, I can ask almost the identical question as my neighbor here about how, given, I share with you your concern about the Netanyahu government and the settlers in the West Bank as real impediments to potential peace. My question in different vocabulary, and I think I'll move on to the second one, was what about something like Hamas? To what degree are they a group that make peace, because even if their charter make it impossible, they insist that this is perpetual resistance. But the question I have is actually in response to your answer to my neighbor's question. We talked about the conflicting narratives. Do you see any way through this challenge? I've heard it characterized that when we Jews see the Palestinians, when we look at the Palestinians, we see Nazis, and that often the Palestinians look at the Jews, they see crusaders. Each of us is viewing this conflict through a historical lens that is so rich, so complicated, so full of trauma, that it's difficult to share not just with the other side, but even with the larger world, those people who haven't lived these conflicts across generations. So I'd be grateful if you've got any thoughts on how we can begin to hear each other in a way that might lead to something like a lasting peace, a lasting greater mutual understanding.
Yeah, a very difficult question. And I am, in a sense, remembering I had, maybe 20 years ago, a discussion with an ultra-Zionist politician. And I asked him, maybe this was in 2005, I don't remember. But I asked him, what's your view of Palestine, of Israel? And he shocked me, because he said, there is only Eretz Israel. There is only the land of Israel. There is nothing else. You either agree with that. If you agree with that, you are welcome to live here, and so on. But other than that, no compromise. So I asked him, do you know the Hamas covenant? And he looked at me and smiled. I said the Hamas, and please, I'm not defending the covenant, but I'm stating a fact. Hamas also looks at Palestine from the river to the sea as being only an Islamic state. So I told him, you are exactly the opposite side of what Hamas is calling for. But where is the middle ground? I mean, where is the middle ground? I mean, you know, whether I like it or not, there is something called Israel, and there is something called Palestine, and each side has its narrative. And this tragedy of the Gaza war says you cannot be so surrealistic and keep bombarding people. Till when? Till when? And okay, so we'll have a new generation of Palestinians who will come out and say, but I'm what witness, and I'm full of hatred, and I'm this, and I'm that. And then you're going to have another cycle. I think the South African experience is a big lesson to us, to both of us. We need maybe to learn some of these lessons. Some people say Northern Ireland, I'm not sure, but more appropriately is the South African experience. Let me say, and my intervention on this by saying, I once was in South Africa, and I was asking a person, a black person, why you didn't throw all the whites out in South Africa? It's not a nice question to ask. And he told me something that I never forgot. He said, listen, if we had thrown the whites of South Africa out, how different would we be from the whites who created apartheid? I was taken. I couldn't say anything. So the moral of this story is that in order to teach them a lesson, I'm going to be revengeful and do things with revenge and show them that I'm strong and I can eliminate them. It's not the answer. Never going to be the answer. And there is a need. There is a need. I know some people don't like what I'm going to say, to come down from our tree, from the high perches of the tree, high branches of the tree, and to come down to earth and to say, how can we go forward? How can we go forward? How can we reconcile narratives? And yes, I agree with the question and comments before by the Palestinian gentleman who said, let them recognize that there is occupation. Let them move forward. So it's not simply a question of Palestinians making the quote unquote historic, psychological, political, social, geographical compromise, but it's also a part of Israel's responsibility. I stop here.
We have another question from the board, and then we'll read it. We'll read one of the current questions.
Yes, my name is Baruch Abedar from Jerusalem. I'm from the old city of Jerusalem. My question, we lived with Israel in 1948, and before was Palestine. Jews, Muslim, Christian lived together. Was no problem between each other. So what is the problem now? Why can't, if we did it once before, why we can't do it now? I don't see any problem why somebody has to put his hand to other to make peace, not anymore fight and war. Because whatever happened in Gaza is, you can't adjust it. I mean, you can justify it. Killing the people and killing the kids and destroying all the cities and destroying the country. How this can work? Two wrong don't make a right. I say all the whole world should come together, especially United States of America. That's the one they should give the orders to Israel to stop and negotiate with the Palestinians. At least this United States, of course, you could love America how much you want, but have compassion. Have compassion for the people in Gaza. Have compassion for the people in Palestine. You divided us. You put walls between each other, checkpoints, everything. You carry the Jews with the Israeli they carry guns, machine guns, and we carry one knife. You could have fight it. So how does that work? What's your opinion about that? What happened in Jenin right now? When Jenin camp, what happened? They're destroying it. They're killing the people there for many years. Anytime you say something, anytime you want to do anything, everybody against you. You have to shut your mouth and to obey the Israelis. How that could be right? You tell me.
Mm,
Bernard,
mm,
you get that? To respond? Where did you hear that, those comments?
I don't know if you can hear it.
Are you hearing me?
Who, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question,
Yeah, the one-
the question of really stretching hands and opening up is a nice American context question. Allow me to say that. We have realities on the ground. And these realities have not always been positive. Allow me to say this thing that happened to me this afternoon on a Jerusalem bus. I prefer to take public transport. And so next to me was a school child of maybe 10, 11 years. So I started asking him, where do you go to school? And he explained to me. And we spent time trying to find out where his school is, whether I know it, I don't know it. I mean, it had nothing to do with conflict. So eventually, in a very not serious but kind of nonchalant manner like this, he said, you know, my father has been imprisoned for over 8 years. So I said, why? Why did your father, why was your father in prison? Oh, he said, he threw stones at the Israelis. Oh, I said, okay. And then he added, and this is, you know, the gist of the whole story. And then he added, my father lost half of his life. And that touched me. I didn't want to continue the conversation with him. But what does that mean for a young boy? It means, and he was a very pleasant boy, it means he wants to go forward. And I say, young boys, young men, like a visitor to Gaza about 3 or 4 months ago told me, there is so much potential with young people there, but they cannot move and they cannot receive money. And these are not young people who want trouble, who want, you know, when I studied in the US, law and order was the big thing. These are young people of law and order. And I said, so why are you saying there is lots of potential? He said, because these young people really want to be part of the tech, you know, high tech. They want to be to be resource for companies. They want to do things. They are aspiring, you know. It was the first time I hear that. I don't know everything, nor do I aspire. But the context in which one child grows is so important, whether that one child will go this way or that way. And I think it's imperative when I spoke about a Marshall-like plan for the Palestine, you know, the idea is that there are young people with potential. Use that potential. Use that potential, but it's not a question of improving living conditions and with occupation. You have to end with occupation. You have to agree to a two-state solution. You have to work for a two-state solution. And I know there will be many Israeli groups who will oppose that. And I know there will be many Palestinian groups who will oppose that. But we have to work for a solution. Otherwise, where would our children go? How would they grow up? And what choices would they make? And it's not simply a question of loving the Israeli or not hating the Israeli. It's a question of the context of possibilities, the context of stability, and the context of moving forward. If we don't move forward, if we go back to management of conflict, if we go back to the idea that there is no Palestinian with whom we can talk, we are once again stuck. And here comes the responsibility of the USA, especially the USA, because Europe follows the USA, to make a difference and to say, enough is enough. We have to go forward. It's going to be difficult, but there is no other alternative.
I'll start with a brief comment. The emphasis placed on psychological trauma, I think, is very important because that's not something I think often here people give enough credit to, so to speak, when they have this notion that Palestinians and Israelis are just always fighting, or however you want to phrase it, Isaac and Ishmael, Jews and Muslims, however, that dichotomy often comes. They don't give enough emphasis to the history of psychological trauma. For failing to see the number of people growing up in Israel and Palestine who have lost family members in previous conflicts. But to your point about resistance on both sides to a possible peace process, I will summarize a note card question regarding how is peace possible with extreme groups in power. I'll quote directly so I don't get in trouble for this. Extreme groups in power such as Hamas and Netanyahu.
That will probably be the last question, Bernard, so we can let you go to sleep.
No, but allow me to once again thanks all of you. I know it has been a hard time, a difficult time for all of us. And in our mourning and our grief, we often tend to forget that there are also people on the other side mourning and grieving. And we tend at these times of conflict to shun away each other. And I think it's not a question of being moderate or being pacifist. It's a question, if you see the context, the environment of conflict, then it's natural to ask, what is better? And this is not, just emotional reaction, but there is a need to work for peace in the Holy Land. And if politicians in the US in particular, in Israel and in Palestine, do not work for peace now, then when? Yes, the cost of peace is tremendous. and some say very painful, but it still remains much better than the cost of war. At least this is my position. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sabella. We will let Bernard sign off because it's 2 a.m. there. For those that would like to stick around and have a less technology-oriented discussion, thank Julie and I both, are willing to stick around for an open discussion, any Q&A that you would like to pursue. But thank you again to Dr. Bernard Sabella.
Say something? Okay, one final comment for getting from the.
Thank you, Julie. Was wonderful. Thank you all.
Hopefully we'll see you in Scranton sometime still.
Dr.
Because
Sabella, Dr. Sabella,
okay, one quick comment.
one quick comment.
Quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
I lost my mom this year at the age of 99 and a half. So she lived all, she was born in Jerusalem in 1923. My dad was born in 1917 at Bedford. And my grandparents were there before 1917 even. And they had to flee after the war of 1948. And she was telling us stories that we were neighbors with Jews and we shared with food and we shared their holidays. We celebrated with their holidays. They celebrated with our holidays and they fasted with us in Ramadan. So it was amazing relationship. So it's not right to say land without people and people without land. I don't know how do you say comment on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's so fitting to end. Your question is, or your comments are wonderful, because it may be so fitting to end with the story of breastfeeding mothers in the times of British Mandate, when Arabs and Jews started to fight each other. Now, I have heard this story from my mother, God bless her soul. She said, when we were in a maternity ward, we were Jews, Arabs, both. When you talk about Arabs, Arabs are Christians and Muslims, because in the US, the idea, and the West, the idea is when you say Arab, it's automatically Muslim. So my mother was telling me that when one of the women who just delivered a baby would need to breastfeed, and she does not have really milk. And remember, these times were in the 30s, and 40s, when we still did not have all kinds of artificial milk and so on. So my mother was telling me then both Muslim women, mothers, Christian mothers, and Jewish mothers would exchange their babies with each other in order to feed them. And then, legally speaking, these babies that were fed in such a way, that were breastfed, would become half brothers and half sisters. And in fact, I have met a couple of people, Arab people, Palestinian people, who were really half brothers and half sisters to Jewish. Now they are old, certainly, but the idea of sharing and what we term conviviality of life during the Ottoman times, with all the misgivings the one gives to the Ottoman times, but the conviviality of living together side by side is something that I hope will one day come back. Thank you very much.